Good morning, ICD. I know that former Prime Minister Gordon Brown will speak after me, and he'll definitely say something about education, being a UN representative for education and his passion for education. So maybe we start. I just want to, first of all, before I speak, to put a disclaimer that this year I'm not here as a member of the ICD board, not yet. This is not to say I don't like the ICD, but because there's due process in my institution that has to be followed, and due process is sacred, as we all know. So I'm here as a partner institution with the ICD, which is the International Bureau of Education, headquartered in Geneva. The theme of this year's ICD is, let me go to show, slideshow.
Just press button 4.
To play. The theme this year is sustainable business and responsible investment. And I'm going to try to address this. I think we all know that for any business to be sustainable, it relies on itself, but it also has external factors that are beyond the business itself per se. The internal factors are smart investment in the strategic direction or vision of that business. It has to have a crisp and clear vision, and it has to have a clear business model. And it has to have a smart investment in strategic assets, and the first strategic asset is human resources with appropriate competences. And there are other resources, many of them infrastructure and so on and so forth. But another resource that has become particularly important is technological advancement, that no business can be sustainable if it does not sustain its own technology savvy and apply those technologies. But in terms of human resources, this requires talent search, deployment, appropriate management, nurturing that talent, leading it, inspiring it, enabling that talent to be fulfilled, rewarding it appropriately, and retaining that talent. But the test of a sustainable business is whether it has commercial success, if it's delivering quality now to its customers, and if it's delivering fulfillment, because the 21st century customer is not just about the quality of the product, but it's the fulfillment of interacting with a business, and it is doing so at profit or with resource efficiency. It has to be competitive. It has to understand what are the core competencies that drive its success and competitiveness. Most importantly, it has to be future ready. The business cannot, it's not enough. Sustainability means staying the course. It means endurance. So being current is not enough. The business has to be current and futuristic. And those that are not futuristic will go belly up, because if they are not keeping up with the trends, not just catching up, but they must be trend setters. They must be innovators. They must be avant-garde and ahead of their game. These are some of the key elements of sustainability, sustainable business and smart investment. But in being sustainable, they themselves must contribute to sustainability through sustainable practices. They must have we have a green economy, we have green jobs, we have jobs that actually enable us to bequeath to the coming generations an environment that they can also sustain their lives on. But it also means that they must contribute to the enabling environment of the business itself. These are some of the key messages I want to pass on. The next thing, in terms of external factors, we all know for businesses to be sustainable, there are many external factors that are beyond the business itself, and they are in the environment of the business, but they are not created by the business, like political stability, good governance, transparency, robust regulatory framework, efficient ways of doing business, not too long red tape that tangles you up, good infrastructure, and alluring investment climate, but most importantly, employable and constantly renewable workforce. A business cannot sustain itself if it does not have a renewable workforce that is always upskilling, reskilling, re-engineering itself. It will get taken by others for breakfast because its workforce got fossilized and it is no longer viable, nor is it sustainable. But having this last element, and having said that the human resource base is the most important strategic asset of a business, underlying this is quality and relevant education and learning opportunities. And this is created by the environment of the business. But I always say to businesses, you have to contribute to attaining and sustaining a high quality and a relevant education system. It cannot be that it is, yes, it's a public good, but you have to create that public good with governments as a form of shared value. Now, going to sustainable business, what are the key challenges? The key challenges of sustainable business and responsible investment now is that the only thing constant in the 21st century is change. So sustaining responsible investment, sustaining yourself as a business in a constantly changing environment is a challenge, because you see how businesses, your core business gets overtaken by technology or new ways of working. So if you don't keep up with the pace of change, you are in trouble. Now we are at the cusp, or perhaps we are almost emerging into Industry 4.0. And the promise we have in the fourth industrial revolution is that it is increasing not only the pace and velocity, but also the complexity of change, and it demands higher integration from multiple angles, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the jury, we know, is still out whether Industry 4.0 is going to clear us out of our jobs and we will be unemployed. The jury is out. Some say it's going to create new jobs, different jobs that demands different ways of working and different competences. And so we will see as it evolves, because quite clearly the only thing we know about Industry 4.0 is that we don't know the details of its future. However, as unknown that future is, we must prepare for that future. The question is, how do we prepare for an unknown? And if a business does not get into this business of preparing for the unknown, it will not be sustainable, and I'll get into that a little bit. While we don't know many of the details, there are certain markers of Industry 4.0 that we're pretty much sure of. And this is the constantly emerging technologies, different technologies, the deeper permeation of technology in production and in the way of doing business, a deeper permeation of artificial intelligence. We have artificial intelligence right now. Most of our life is managed by artificial intelligence, but this would be deeper permeation. And deeper and more sophisticated machine-human intelligence and machine-man-human interface in production, in smart factories, and using cyber-physical systems. And deeper connectivity, and the deeper connectivity through the internet, but not just through the internet as we know it, but through the Internet of Things in this cyber physical systems. So the Industry 4.0 demands out of a business that wants to be sustainable an investment in knowing the new demands for the frontline workers, but also for the backline workers. What does the business have to do to keep their workers inside 4.0 being effective? This means that there is a heightening need, from our perspective, for businesses to invest in building the future force, not just at the upper end. I work with businesses a lot, as you may imagine, because UNESCO's resources come from governments mainly, but we also work with the private sector a lot. And invariably, when we talk to the private sector, they have a sharper ear if you are talking about post-secondary education, investment in technical and vocational education, we need workers. Or higher education, we need engineers and whatnot. But what they don't realize is that the throughput at the tertiary levels depend on the robustness of the base. And if you don't have a good quality and relevant education at the base, what you are always going to be dealing with is a deficit and trying to address those deficits. And you want to plug your ears when business sector are always telling us, or they come out of the schools not trainable, or they don't have the right competencies, they don't have digital literacies, they don't have technology savvy, they don't have. The question we want to ask is, and where were you when these not haves were being designed? So the business has a moral obligation not just to donate and cut a check, but to define very clearly the demand side of competences so that the supply side can stay relevant, not as a time slice, but as a sustainable relevance. And that we can have competencies, we can have graduates of our systems that come out with competencies that are currently current, but there are also competences for the future. So we've been investing a good amount of work, I will say with some collaboration from some businesses, particularly the high-tech businesses, on defining these future competencies. Just what are these competencies? I hope it's clear. It's very faint, huh? Can you see? No? I don't know, maybe if we can dim the light.
Maybe turn on the light.
That might help a little bit. It doesn't help. A little bit. Okay, I'm gonna finally strengthen this color. I like soft colors, and sometimes they are too soft to see. But in this dialogue of competencies and what is a viable future competence, is to, and a lot of people, most of the time, we just sort of colloquially talk of skills, competences, as if they are on par. But we have been working with the private sector, with business a lot, to define what are these future competencies. But since we work at a global level, what I'm gonna share with you is what we see as global competencies that every global citizen must have, and that businesses must invest in enabling people to acquire these competencies. If this business want to have a chance at being sustainable, they must invest in grooming these global competencies. I don't have time to talk about the local competencies because I have a few minutes. So basically, what we have on the side is what constitutes competence. And for us, competence is constituted by an interactive and integrated information, ability now to use data, big data, and to understand data and the value of it, technology, knowledge, deep knowledge of your domain, skills, which is the application of that domain to resolve or to perform tasks, that's skills, and the values, and the last one is attitudes, and so on. Now, in the next bar, what we are showing with that mesh is that at any point in time, one, when you display competence, because competence is what you are able to do or say or make, whereas knowledge is what you may have. But if knowledge is not enough, education systems is not enough for them to produce knowledgeable and skilled people if those people cannot do anything. So it's not enough to know. It's what you're going to do with that knowledge to create a private and a public good. And businesses need people who can do with the knowledge they have. But at any point in time when you behave, you are using all these. As I'm speaking now, somebody could say, okay, she's using her communication skills. Yes, but I have to have the knowledge of what the hell I'm talking about. And I have to address you with a certain etiquette and a certain attitude, a certain disposition. I have to have some ethical disposition. I have used lots of information in coming up with this presentation and loads of data and so on. And all these things come together in this little presentation that I'm making. So nobody at any point in time is just using a skill, because behind the skill there's knowledge. And when you use that skill, you are also applying an attitude and so on and so forth. So that's what that wire mesh is supposed to show. So here is the list of competencies. Because I don't have time, I'm practically going to flash them, which we believe every business has the business of investing in them, and every global citizen must have. The first one is lifelong learning. The only and absolute output and impact of a 21st century education system is whether it can produce effective lifelong learners, whether it can produce people who know how to learn. So what to learn is important, but if you know how to learn, when the context changes in the 21st century and what you have learned has become obsolete, you will learn anew. So lifelong learning becomes a very important competence for anybody in the world. The second important competence is self-agency. I don't need to explain self-agency, but it means being empowered to know the private good that you want out of your environment and to interact effectively with your environment to produce that private good. And you have to use resources intelligently and sustainably in doing anything that you need to do. While being a self-benefiting agent is important, you always have to be interacting with others, because at any one point, no matter how good you are, nobody's competence is good enough to be able to do everything that the world or the individual needs. So you need to be able to work with others. And there are little examples there, but I don't have time. You need, beyond working with others, you need to be able to work in and with the world. So it's the immediate others, like right now I'm working with you, but this video is going to go on the net, and I'm going to work with the world. And this is what is called being local and global at any point in time, being immediate and distant. And these are the core competencies. We need very textured transdisciplinarians, because generally in life problems and life opportunities do not come to you in nice packages of specializations. You don't have a physics problem or a religion problem. Life problems come to you in a way that they need you. Yes, you need to be a very deep specialist in your domain, but you also need to have sufficient literacy, functional literacy, in so many other disciplines. So, because anytime you are working, you are calling on a range of transdisciplines to come to bear on what you are doing. And especially during production. At work, you are calling on right now, you are calling on your knowledge of culture, you are working with other cultures, your language expertise, your science expertise, your everything you can imagine. So the 21st century business has to balance deep specialization in one specific domain, but transdisciplinarity enough, literacy enough to know when you are out of depth. I have to be able to know, this is as far as my physics goes. Now I have to go and get a physicist. Now I'm going to working with others. So these are extremely important competencies. And the last competence is multiliterateness. The 3 R's are no longer enough. we used to have reading, writing, arithmetic. When I was young and going to school, you were cool. Now we have to have digital literacy, cultural literacy, sex literacy, financial literacy, all sorts of literacies. And these literacies, we are in the ICD today where culture is the backbone. Here we need to go beyond cultural literacy to discipline, understanding culture as a discipline deep enough. But these literacies are called, your literacies are called on to different degrees depending on what you are doing. If I am trying to use this laptop, maybe my shallow digital and tech literacy is being called on. But if I'm talking with you, it's my linguistic literacy, my language literacy. But if I were investing in the stock market, it's my financial savvy and my economics understanding and finance and financial literacy. If I'm trying to stay healthy and stop growing sideways and trying to grow upwards, it's my health literacy that is being called. I have to understand what is the impact of growing sideways, what are the consequences, and why shouldn't I grow sideways? So we have loads and loads of literacies. At any point in time, we are using them. But within a business, because businesses have their domains, the core domain, and then they have the supporting domains, the business has to understand, as I said earlier, what are the core literacies that are required in this business without which we cannot survive, because this is what underpins our work. And then what are the supporting literacies? What are the desirable literacies? So it's like rings and rings and rings. Lastly, when you use all these competences, what we want to say is they are applied to realize some form of good. Competences are often applied for bad. When a good scientist decides to go into their basement and cook up a bomb and use the knowledge, but uses that knowledge without good ethics, without good attitude, and for a public bad, but it's still competence. You can't deny. This fellow is quite good at what they do. But whatever we do in business, out of business, is to realize a positive good. And this good could be individual, it could be my small circle of concern, like family, friends, but it keeps going until it's a public good, until it's a national good, until it's a global good. And what we've done is sort of map these competencies in here to the more or less the degree of contribution to the good. My last word is, every business that needs to be sustainable, needs to invest in the competences of its workforce. It needs to invest in the competences of its machines, because we are now talking about not just intelligent people, but intelligent machines. And it has to connect product to machine, product to man, man to machine, machine. And this is why we talk about interfaces. It's no longer silos, that we have the machine that produce, but the good is able to, the product is able to communicate to the machine that it has defects, and for the machine to take corrective action. And no matter how much 4.0 technology is supposed to creep us out, behind all that is the human intelligence, designing the machine intelligence. Although the machine intelligence, particularly in CPSs, can have a life of their own and an interaction and their own connectivity that may override us sometimes. The issue is still, how do we manage this? So the sustainability of business of the future relies on these global competencies, but they have to be mediated with the local competencies. If we're talking at a country level, we'd say the country has to know what is its long-term vision, macroeconomic, microeconomic development, social development. Where is the country going? And what does it need as competencies? If we're now talking about a business, The business has to know what it requires and to nurture and so on, what I've said before. But my last word is businesses have to contribute to the creation of public goods. Businesses sometimes, if we go back to those components of competence, are too much of self-benefiting, self-agency, but not the collective. And sometimes businesses are too focused on the immediate rather than the long term. Like we will invest in technical vocational education, in higher education, and so on and so forth. So sustainability for businesses means smart and responsible investment in the current and in the future to create the private good of that business and to create the public good. And businesses have to have an ethos of a lifelong learning organization. If a business is not a lifelong learning system itself, as I said earlier, other businesses will take it for breakfast and the rest will be it was. And thank you very much. You can follow us on Twitter. Okay.
Thank you very much for a very nice presentation.
Thank you.
I think the audience may have some questions to you.
I don't have answers.
You should find them. You should find them. Let's do it. Let's try to do it. Okay.
I will kindly ask you to remain at the podium, or you can sit in that sofa.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. No,
Okay.
it's okay. I
Questions?
understand.
Questions? Please.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Alex, I'm from Germany. I have a question about what you said, the deep specialization and the deep knowledge that is necessary in one particular field. As a young student, I've noticed myself that more and more employers are asking for this deep knowledge of one particular field. And it's very difficult to gain such deep knowledge at a very early age. And because there's so much knowledge out there, there's so many fields you can specialize in. And I wonder what your opinion is on the danger of this deep specialization happening at an early age that will limit young people to one area of work. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. It is a complex question that gets right into the core of my business, because our core business, we are a center of excellence in curriculum. Just what people should learn, how much, when, and so on. But the most important thing is at the level of general education is for learners to be given very, very good quality education that is general. That means this is where you gain your deep literacy, not just shallow, deep literacy across disciplines. The humanities, the social sciences, the religions, the philosophies, and so on. But the problem is when we are so information laden and pushed, is that the curriculum tends to be overloaded. One more subject, until kids or learners, old and young, are just skidding on top, but not gaining anything. So what we're pushing for is, let's stop isolating subjects at the lower level, but let's look at the core competencies that learners must acquire, and then look at the subjects that contribute to the acquisition of these competencies, and then front load the subjects that have higher contribution to what are core competencies. And this is why we had to come up with a framework to guide the world and say, what are the global competencies that every global person must have? But if you say a learner must be a self-benefiting agent, the question is, how do you demonstrate agency? It demands a lot out of teachers. It does. How do you demonstrate communication and so on? How do you demonstrate creative thinking, problem solving, all the small examples? But when I've said this, so integrating subjects is a wiser way to go than having many, many subjects. But post-secondary school level, you do have to specialize in something. But if you had a good general education, and if you continue to learn, you can, with your chemistry, physics of the general education level, continue to read chemistry at higher levels with understanding. It doesn't mean it will make you a specialist in chemistry. But this is what is required. Deep understanding of your discipline. It isn't dangerous, because we cannot afford to have somebody who knows a little bit of everything and nothing really in detail. So it's about balance. It's about the balance in the curriculum to say how are we going to balance, and we talk of scope and depth balance. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Paul, please. And you.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was very good. As an educator myself, I was wondering, how do businesses outside of financial groups, how do they help evolve and change or grow the education industry in the country, particularly in a poor or developing country?
Businesses are on the demand side of education. So they know more about the competences that are required in their respective domains. So if we have a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, the parastatal and all other demand sides, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, because they are the demand side. The first contribution is that they should co-design the relevance of education together as national actors and not as individual self-agents, but they must create this public good. And this means expressing very explicitly what are the demands in the labor market. If I was talking to elders and rabbis and priests and whatnot, they should give us, what are the measures of ethics in our culture? If I'm talking to the elders in a culture, what is an appropriate use of language? What is an appropriate way of showing respect and so on? So the values, the attitudes, the skills that we integrate into the curriculum should resonate with the supply side. Otherwise, what you will have an irrelevant education system. If you have just educators get into a boardroom, crank out the curriculum on their own and dish it out, then you have this never-ending song. If it is the older people, they tell you, I don't recognize them anymore. I go to the Arab states, these kids don't speak Arabic. They don't understand the Arabic culture. They feel alienated of their children. And yet education is supposed to tether you to your context while enabling you to act global. I must have an identity as a person of who I am, but that identity should not limit me to acting only in my local context. But I can assure you, if you don't have an anchored identity yourself, you can't interact with others well, because you're just floating. You don't know who you are. So this is the first contribution is intellectual. The second contribution is inducing innovation, because invariably the drivers of innovation in any country is not the public service. This is not to say anything negative about the public, but it's the private sector. They are the drivers of innovation. And by driving innovation, if you work with the business, you will be able to keep up and to create innovators. I'm very aware that my specialization is not in technology, but I'm very aware that I want my curriculum to enable learners to acquire these competencies. And because of this awareness, I have to reach out to the better. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. I see you.
Good morning. We have to be able to reach out to business. So the first contribution is intellectual. The second one is improving relevance. And the relevance of education should not be seen exclusively as responding to context and catching up, but the relevant education that is relevant is the one that produces people who also change their context and not just respond to their context, but they change the context for the better. And then, of course, financially. The businesses can also contribute financially. Businesses can also contribute to the culture of work. The private sector, because they have to watch their bottom line, have a culture of work that actually supports resource efficiency and impact. And by working with business, the public sector could actually become better and improve their way of doing business themselves. An average country does not afford its education system because it's expensive. But at the same time, an average country does not reap the dividend that is commensurate to its investment in education. So there's a lot of room for efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you. You, sir? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My name is Qais Mohammadi from Afghanistan. My question, however, there are two, but I'll just put it into one because time is precious. Given the current education system, both in the third world countries and also in the advanced countries, and the tendency of the businesses to replace human labor with machines, and then we see the advancement of AI technology, that they even say whatever is frequent will be replaced by machineries. Even we will have in 10 years of time lecturers who are robots. That's what was predicted in World Economic Forum 2017, the last year. The question is, should we focus more on the way of storage of information or keeping information in our education system, or should we focus more on skills and the development of skills in students, like decision making, like team working, like being innovative and things like that? If we look at the trend of storage of information in human beings, that has changed a lot from the past 10 years. For example, 10 years ago, we would have to memorize a phone number. However, today we have our smartphones and video phones. So where should be the focus of education mostly given to?
It's a very complex question, but as I said in my presentation, the one most important output an education system can create is somebody who knows how to learn. How to learn is far much more important than what to learn, because the what you learn, as you say, in the 21st century will become obsolete rather quickly. So it is about future readiness. The challenge of education systems today is how to enable learners, both young and old, to be current, but also to be future ready. The current is easier because we know what is current. We know the skills we need, we know the knowledge we need now, or at least we know to some extent. But what we will need in the future, we can only prepare for it. And the first form of preparation is enabling someone to become an effective lifelong learner. Enabling someone to become a self-benefiting agent. We talk a lot, you'll hear a lot of student-teacher agency. I like to talk about self-agency because whether it's a student, a teacher, an old person, a young person, we all have self-benefiting agents. This is why we listed these core competencies as competencies that education systems, regardless of where they are, should focus on. So if people could be enabled to be future ready, then that question will be that we will enable them to adapt and to have the agility to adapt, but we also enable them to become disruptors. It's not just about adapting, but it's about also causing it being innovative. So we can't pose the question as either or. Should education systems focus on data or on information or on skills? That's why at the beginning of this doesn't seem to want to go back. But at the beginning of the framework, we showed the component element of a competence, and it includes all those questions that you were pitting as ors. It includes ability to use data. It's not just storing data, but it's filtering data and information. At this point in time when there's so much, as she was asking, what is relevant to me for what I need to do now? Data, information, but knowledge of the disciplines, all those elements that I started off with. So its integration is far much more important, but it is complex in a classroom where teachers have been groomed to become subject specialists and have been groomed for a very long time to emphasize what learners must learn, not so much what they can do with what they have learned. So there are challenges, but it's not either or. And it is a complex question, as I said.
Okay.
Thank you.